I will be talking to you today about the Ukrainian refugee reception and integration in Switzerland. The focus of my presentation will be on the challenges and the structural problems we have in Switzerland, and I'll also share some ideas for future improvements with you. Before I get into the presentation, I would like to make two initial remarks concerns the conference. Now, the title of the conference here says, From Security to Solidarity. Now, in Switzerland, when it comes to Ukrainian refugees, we actually never felt like there's any security issue. It's a completely different context. Security issues were controversially discussed in asylum fields among many topics, but not when it comes to Ukrainian refugees. So I'm going to focus more about solidarity in terms of crisis in my presentation. And the second remark is about panel 2, which says academia versus practice, like you mentioned before. And also here in Switzerland, it's actually that academia and science usually align with practice. And they often face resistance when it comes to political or legal realities. So I'm sharing with you today practical insights that do align with practice and with science and academia, but may not always be the case when it comes to political or legal realities. So with that having said, let me quickly go through the overview of my presentation. I'll show you some number and talk about some characteristics of the Ukrainian refugees in Switzerland. We'll go into a bit of the structural problems we face about reception and integration, and also the role civil society played and how its potential has been missed mostly. And I'll share some future improvement ideas. Now, at the moment, we had around 88,000 Ukrainians who have been granted the protection status S up until now. From these 88,000 Ukrainian refugees, we still have around 70,000 still living in Switzerland. Most of them, 65%, are female, like we've seen also from other studies, it's high. Most of them have a higher education and have a high work qualification. Now, what was special about the Ukrainian refugees coming to Switzerland was that usually everything that's organized in refugee reception is led by the authorities. They have all the data, they know all the whereabouts, they know who they are, who goes to school, and so on. And with the Ukrainian refugees, it was different, as there were always two ways from the beginning. There was the official way for the people who registered, like you see in this picture. This is a queue of Ukrainian refugees queuing in front of a federal asylum center. That's the house in the back with the little windows. But there was also the private way for the Ukrainians who came because of the 3-month visa exemption. They could stay in Switzerland without registering. So it was completely new to the authorities, not having all the data, not knowing where all the refugees are, and that was a big challenge. Let me talk a little bit about the structural problems we face in Switzerland. Now, what was also very new, of course, was the protection status S, we call it. It's very similar to the one in the EU. And this also being very new, we also see that it was associated with a return policy. So people thought they are not going to stay so long, so it was also not as many integration supplies offered to them as they usually would. So this turned out to be an issue later on because they didn't have access to the language courses in the beginning, to the job coachings and so on, and this had to be changed on later on. Another structural problem we see is when it comes to accommodation. Now, when it comes to accommodation, especially in times of crisis, usually the authorities tend to, I call it a close to the system approach, which means it's usually public housing, basic infrastructure, it's usually military facilities, civil defense facilities on the ground and so on, because that's where they have a big capacity. And the same approach was taken with the Ukrainian refugees. As you see in this picture, this is outside the city of Bern. This is a container building that was built up for around 1,000 Ukrainian refugees. It costs a lot of money, not only to build, but also to maintain it. And why is this a structural problem that we have in Switzerland? Because at the same time, there were thousands of families who offered a place at their home for refugees to host. So it was not able to actually match this potential that was given by civil society because of this close to the system approach that Switzerland is used to going. Another structural problem we face concerns the labor market. Now, we've already talked a bit before in the morning about it, but Switzerland, I don't know whether you know this, we have a very strict policy when it comes to recognizing foreign qualification in work, but also higher education or education qualifications. It's very hard to work in the same job as they used to. And we saw from studies that this is one of the main factors why actually we have only 16 to 20% of Ukrainian refugees now working in the Swiss labor market. Another one was the lack of integration support that was given by not granting language courses or job coachings and so on. So that's another issue that we face. Now I would like to talk to you a little bit about what role civil society played and what potential actually they bring to the table. And also maybe to connect to the discussion we had in the morning about preparing for a next crisis. We think that could be really potential. Now, what was very interesting in Switzerland, it was in spring 22, it was March, just shortly after the outbreak of the war, there was a civil grassroots organization who launched an online platform for families living in Switzerland to register their free beds. And within no time, it was a couple of days, there were 60,000 families who registered on this platform, and the capacity was around 120,000 beds who were offered by civil society to help in these times of crisis. Now, because I explained you a little bit how the official way is organized of accommodation, this potential was actually not seen or not used. So in the end, it was about 1/3 of this potential of this 120,000 beds that were actually matched between refugees and host families. Still, we can say it's around 30,000 people who lived with refugees who lived with host families. And authorities were very critical of the engagement of civil society because they didn't know how long this will last. Discussions were, will it be over before the summer holidays because everybody wants to go on holidays, and then what do we do with the refugees? We have to find alternative solutions and so on. So it was very critically discussed, this insecurity of not knowing how civil society will continue in this engagement. But as of now, we still have 20,000 Ukrainians living in host families. So that's a strong proof of how resilient actually civil society can be. And I did some interviews myself with host families, but also with refugees to ask them about their experience, how it was and what were the benefits, but also what they needed more from the authorities and others. And of course, you're all experts, so I don't have to explain you in depth what were the benefits for the refugees, like having the network of the family for a job, for instance, but also for social ties, living in a normalized setting of a family as well, in a neighborhood, compared to the container village, who is far outside of residential areas usually. They don't have public transportation and so on. So there were a lot of benefits for the refugees. But there were also a lot of benefits for the host families themselves, as, for instance, they told me how they got to know a new reality for people who live in Switzerland and they had no clue about. They didn't know that living in Switzerland could also mean being with all these criteria who they needed to fit, or the information they didn't get and how much time it needed in order to get the right information for where the kid has to go to school and so on. So there were a lot of, we call it benefits for the family in order to broaden their experience in terms of hosting and also what it means to live in Switzerland. Now, there was a lot of criticism as well because the families were basically left to themselves with this situation. There was very little financial resources granted to the families. There was also no professional resources or almost no professional resources for the host families. And there was also no platform of communication where they could find the right information for their problem or ask something and get a reply. So it was a lot of effort for the host families and the refugees in order to make it happen. So that's even more a proof for how resilient civil society can be. Now, let me talk to you a little bit about the improvements that we see coming from this experience as well. Now, one point would be, of course, like you see now, to take civil society as an important actor into the whole accommodation system of the refugee reception, but also for integration. We think there's a lot of potential for civil society to be involved actively, not to be sidelined, and to then have much more potential as well. If you see, even for the financial resources, it would make much more sense, for instance, but also for the benefits that it creates for both sides and so on. But they would need to be really integrated in the whole system in a professional way. What we also learned that, and it was also mentioned in the panel before, that we see a very important factor is to link integration and even temporary protection from the beginning. Because if you lose the time of not granting language courses and job coachings and so on, we lose valuable time. And from this 16 to 20%, we have a lot of the skilled workers not being able to work, even though they could. And even from this 16 to 20%, a lot of the Ukrainians do not work in their proficiency. They work in a much lower profession than what they bring from their qualifications. So we really think, even though their temporary protection status, it should really start and be very fast as well. And in order to do all of this, in order to support the host families, in order to have all these language courses, the job coachings and so on, we need, of course, the skilled workers. Now, I learned that in Estonia it's not the case, but in Switzerland we have a huge issue of not finding the skilled workers. There's a very high demand, and it's really an issue. So how can we deal with it, with these ideas when we do not have the skilled workers? So we came up with an idea of an international pool system of experts in refugee reception and integration. And what does this mean? When we face a crisis and an influx of refugees in a country like Switzerland, usually our neighbors have it too. So we don't find the skilled workers in Germany, Austria, or anywhere else because they have the same situation. So we have to think broader. We have to think an international pool system of experts who, of course, with a very well-prepared system, and we also talked about preparation in the morning, could be put into place very effectively. And how did we come about this idea? You see me in this picture together with a delegation of Lebanese experts. They all work in the field of refugee reception and integration in Lebanon, and they're very highly trained. They have a lot of expertise in many fields, and they were visiting Switzerland in, I think it was June, just in the middle of the Ukrainian crisis, and we organized an expert exchange with them and with several Swiss authorities and experts from the field and so on. So we all talked about how we cannot find the skilled workers, and they said, why don't you ask us? We are here. We can assist you, we can support you, we can even maybe bring you another perspective into your system. So first, maybe the reaction was a bit weird, or a bit new for Switzerland to think of this kind of system. But if you really think along this idea, we think it's very worth pursuing. And I would be also very interested to hear your perspective on this. Now, I'd like to conclude with this last slide, and I would like to make what I've just said a bit more pointed, let's say in theses. And what do we actually say coming from this experience is that a welcoming society can organize refugee reception better than the authorities in terms of crisis. And the part of the authorities then is to support the system well by finances, by professional resources, and so on. And I want to give you an example. I don't know how it's in Estonia, but in Switzerland, if a woman is pregnant, the state grants you several hours for a midwife. You can get to know the midwife, you can even choose her, you can see who do you feel comfortable with, she prepares you for the birth. And when you have the child, she will come to visit you at your home, she will check on the baby, on the family, she will give you trips, and she will give you more insights and so on. So here the state makes actually sure this very new phase of a family life in Switzerland is well supported by proficiency and by finances. And the same kind of logic should be applied also to host families. And in order to do this, of course, I already said we need to think broader. We cannot just think within Switzerland or within Europe. We have to think in transcontinental pool systems. And of course, here also we need to prepare them. We need to arrange with the authorities what about the visas, how is the payment, and so on. So this has all to be very well prepared beforehand, otherwise it's not effective. And also this, it's not something new as such. It's maybe new to the field, but actually it's been done in so many other ways. For instance, in earthquakes, there are international pool system of experts who, when there's an earthquake somewhere, they're very effectively can be put into place and help the country to handle this crisis. So also here, it's not something that's completely new or is impossible to do, but it just has to be adopted on this system. And like I already said, the state can save a lot of money with it. And it's not just the financial resources, actually, by saving these container constructions outside of residential areas, but it's also the benefits for the whole society when they get to know families and they also get to know the reality of the refugee and so on. That would be very beneficial for the whole country. So that was it. I'm in time, I see.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you very much, and a very, very big applause to Gina for such a wonderful and thorough presentation, and certainly some very, very good ideas there. I am looking at the little gadget that I've been handed over to see whether we have any questions to you from the audience. Alas. Oh, we do have one question to you. So, you mentioned that the Ukrainian refugees have never been considered a security issue in Switzerland. But what about other refugees or political asylum seekers?
Yeah, I would say for over the last 2 decades, security issues have been mostly associated with Muslim asylum seekers, who some of them may have radical affiliations. That was the most talked about security issue, I'd say. But there are also other security issues, like, for instance, how the federal asylum centers, like the one you saw in the picture, how are they run, for instance? There's always security there too, and that has also been very controversially discussed. Is this needed in that way? There were also other asylum centers who were tested in a different way, there was more like an approach of more a social approach, not such a security approach tested. And this has been very controversially discussed because usually on a federal or in a national state, the security interests are higher than on the local level. So yeah, we have many discussions about it, but like I said, with the Ukrainians, it was not in that way discussed.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, please. Now, my role is to translate this to you, unless the lady's speaking in English. Oh, she does.
I'm very interested in the language question, actually. You said the newcomers have to learn the language, but which one, if we are talking about Switzerland? Do they get to choose? Or can you describe a bit the situation, please?
Yeah. As you mentioned, we have several languages. We have 4 in total, but 3 are the biggest ones, like German, French, and Italian. So depending where you are in Switzerland, it's another language. So in the German-speaking part, of course, it's German that's taught. In the French-speaking part, it's French, and in the Italian, it's Italian. So that's usually where they focus on the language learning skills, because also afterwards for the job market and so on, when they stay in this region, that's where they have most benefits from the language training.
Thank you very much. So basically, they have to stay in the region they came, so it's safer and easier for them, right?
In the beginning, it was free. They could choose where they want to go, and now they started to regulate it more as well with the one who registered, yes.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Gina. And another applause, please, to Gina.